Okay, so before we get started, first of all, let me thank everybody that's been involved in putting on this outstanding conference yet again this year. SENEDIA really puts on, thank you. I know everyone that stood up here has thanked Molly, and rightfully so, and I guess I'll begrudgingly thank Tim and recognize Tim Del Judas for all the work that he's done. This certainly wouldn't happen without the people that pull us together. And this is really such a unique conference. We have access to some of the most influential and smartest people, both in industry and the government side and academia in the labs. It really is a unique experience for all of us. So thank you for everyone who's pulled this together. Okay, I'd like to take a second also just to reflect on the representation that we've had here earlier today. And again, truly unique lineup of individuals, very influential nationally, locally, and all of our respective part of the defense industrial base. Thank you all for finding the time to participate here and making this the unique and great experience that it is. So now I have the distinct privilege of introducing our next speaker. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm a SENEDIA board member. My name is Paul Ferraro. I work for Raytheon. I'm responsible for what we call the Air Power Business Area, which is essentially our Air Force business for the United States, airborne assets for the United States Navy, and certainly our international allies. Thrilled to do the work that we do here and thrilled to be part of it. But like all of us, Raytheon is not only works to ensure that we're executing on our current contracts and commitments, but that we're also preparing for the advanced threats with future technologies and ensuring that the U.S. and our allies have the solutions that they need when they need them. Keeping with the importance of that mission and supporting our U.S. and allied warfighters by sustaining their abilities and capabilities that they may need is something that we proudly share with the United States Acquisition and Sustainment Office. The mission of enabling and delivering sustainment of secure, resilient, and preeminent capabilities to our warfighters and our international partners quickly and cost-effectively is one that this office excels at. This obligation to our warfighters and our allies is a belief that is also firmly held by today's keynote speaker from the very office, and is my distinct honor to introduce him now. Senate confirmed in April of 2022, the Honorable Dr. William LaPlante serves as the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. In this role, is responsible to the Secretary of Defense for all matters pertaining to acquisition, contract administration, logistics and material readiness, installations and environment, operational energy, nuclear, chemical, and biological defense, acquisition workforce, and the defense industrial base in total. Prior to this appointment, Dr. LaPlante served as the President and Chief Executive Officer of Draper Labs. Previously, he was Senior Vice President, General Manager of MITRE National Security. He also served as the Senate-confirmed Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics from 2014 to 2017. And prior to that, Dr. LaPlante spent 26 years at Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory. Please join me in welcoming Dr. William LaPlante.
Hello, everybody. I know I'm the last speaker, so I don't know what that means. I plan these events, and I don't know what you have different strategies for the last speaker. I won't say what they are. I know them all. Anyway, thanks, Paul, for the introduction, and thanks to Molly, the Rhode Island congressional delegation, the entire Defense Innovation Day team for making today possible. It's great to see so many friends here, industry partners. And of course, I have to mention Chairman Jack Reed, who's been a steadfast advocate for the Department of Defense and a steadfast advocate for all of us in this room and this venue. And so he really deserves a lot of credit. And I want to thank him for his leadership and all he does for Rhode Island, the DoD, and most importantly, those who serve in uniform. You know, when we think about DoD and our armed forces and acquisition, the first things that usually come up are the Columbia-class submarines, things like Abrams tanks, F-35s, et cetera. And obviously these are undoubtedly impressive capabilities, and they generate a lot of interest and talk. But of course, the most important resource is not them, but our people, and that includes not just the men and women in uniform, but the civilians who in the defense workforce that do the hard work, and of course our contractor teammates. We're all on the same team. We're all on the same team. When we say take care of the people, those are all the people we have to watch out for. And I have a special, there is no gratitude to all of you and our partners in industry for the tremendous sacrifices you make each day delivering essential products and services to our warfighters, especially here in New England. And, you know, I was, as my intro said, I was the CEO at Draper during the height of the pandemic. And as all this audience knows, the defense industry worked through the pandemic and got the products out the door. So it's a remarkable work that all of you do. This is so-called the Silicon Valley of undersea technology or undersea warfare. The greater New England defense ecosystem is a critical linchpin for our national security. And I think this region is a model that we should be seeking to emulate in other defense ecosystems around the country that are unique to those geographic areas and the demographics of the area. There are more than 8,000 companies, large and small, that received prime, they're not subcontractors, prime or defense or homeland security contracts over the last 3 years. And with average annual spend in New England of over or nearly $60 billion, New England's defense contracts are growing at a faster rate than the national average over the last decade. From developing the next generation of skilled workers to boosting small businesses to delivering high-end capabilities that deter our adversaries, that's what we're doing here, and the work done here in New England is going to have a significant impact on our national security for years and decades to come. And so thank you for the tremendous work you're doing. In looking through the sessions that you've had already this week, I hope it's clear, obviously, that we're at a very interesting time, as always we are, but particularly this inflection point, which has been going on for a while in the strategic competition with China. You heard Secretary Del Toro from the Navy discuss the importance of a ready and modernized Navy for pacing this challenge. You heard Admiral Fanchetti talk about the decisive decade we're in and the lessons we can learn from the rearmaments efforts between the wars that the Navy did, the great work the Navy did between the wars in the 1930s. And by the way, I just want to extend my congratulations to Lisa Fanchetti on her historic nomination to be our next CNO. She's absolutely the right person, and I urge our partners in the Senate to get her confirmed, as well as those of all our other DoD nominees being held up. We need them on the team. We need them in the game. Our readiness depends on it. You also heard functional experts from across the Navy and OSD touch on everything from RDT&E and future capabilities to work with our allies and partners such as AUKUS. And we collectively implement the National Defense Strategy. From my lane in acquisition and sustainment, it's really about getting integrated, unrivaled capabilities to our warfighters quickly, but just as importantly, at scale. Quickly, but at scale. If it's not done at scale, it's not going to matter. So our defense industrial base, therefore, is the very foundation that underpins our ability to do so, and that's where I'd like to focus most of my time today. But it's also important, and many of you know this, I always have to remind myself, go back to first principles and say how we got here and where we are today. As you all know and we all remember, our last great power competition was with the Soviet Union, and it lasted from the end of World War II roughly until 1991. Many of us remember the commentators noting the triumph of liberal democracy and the expected peace dividend. Many of our companies and labs experienced the joy of the peace dividend and loss of funding, of course. Now, we all dealt with that in the 90s. And of course, with the fall of our greatest strategic competitor, rightfully so, defense and R&D spending fell. And we certainly slowed in development of many of our major weapons acquisition programs and canceled many. I've gone through the history of the B-2. That's just one example of many things that we changed as a result of the Cold War being over. And of course, the experts at the top and the leaders in the top noted we had excess capacity in defense industrial base and pushed to reduce it. And there was the famous so-called Last Supper, which was hosted by Secretary of Defense Les Aspin and Bill Perry, who was the deputy at the time, to really tell industry and the leaders of industry we're going to need to downsize, and told them to figure it out. Fewer shipyards, fewer depots, fewer everything. And by the way, there's been some great recent articles that have gone through that meeting, and it's a pretty remarkable meeting that happened. The Pentagon then moved its focus to efficiency, just in time. We moved in the late 90s into things like the lead system integrator model, which started out with places like what was DDG21, which became DDG1000. And of course, the just-in-time delivery, which was certainly modeled after what was happening in the commercial world with people seeing what Walmart at the time was doing with their IT system, or what FedEx was doing in tracking where everything was. And of course, the point was minimize excess inventory, drive cost out of your system, reduce tooth to tail. It was considered best practice. Then, of course, 9/11 happened, and the national security establishment went on high alert, rightfully so, and spent the last 2 decades becoming expert in fighting this incredibly complex engagement in the last 25 years of 9/11. They were very taxing, make no mistake, but in many respects, there was a very, very low-tech adversary, and of course, a very permissive, largely, environment, particularly from a non-contested sense. Now, fast forward to where we are. We're dealing with a rising China that has been watching everything we've been doing for at least 25 years and building a counterforce to everything that was our strength. You can see it, it's very deliberate. And of course, we've got a dangerous and aggressive Russia right now as we speak every day in the news, whose conduct in Ukraine has been horrible and reprehensible. So many like to compare the situation with China as akin to perhaps the Soviet Union, but as they say, history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, it sometimes rhymes. So I beg to differ that it's a repeat of the Cold War. I don't believe that's the case. I'm not sure many of you believe that. Because unlike the Soviet Union, we're dealing with a competitor that possesses not only a formidable military and nuclear arsenal, but also has economic R&D and manufacturing capabilities that the Soviets could only dream of. If you look at the gross domestic product or GDP, whatever the estimates you believe, and the adjusted estimates of where China is today, you compare them certainly to Russia is today, pre-Ukraine. Russia's economy was smaller than California's. That was before Ukraine. So the point about China is they're dictating to their state-connected enterprises to compete with the United States. The other piece of it is that not only in military, they're looking at military as only one element of it, but also in cutting-edge technologies, critical minerals, things that can be quote-unquote weaponized, such as quantum sensing, quantum computing, of course, hypersonics, artificial intelligence, and the rest. They're building their force to be exactly asymmetrical to us and targeting our gaps and seams in every domain. So the capabilities we need to deter and, if necessary, defeat our adversaries has to address this, and it cannot be produced necessarily overnight. The other piece about deterrence, as many of you know, is all that matters for deterrence is what the adversary actually believes. They're going to be deterred that they believe there's something where the benefit to them, the risk to them, if they do something, is greater than the benefit they will get. So all that matters is whether they believe that, if we're going to deter them. Of course, few anticipated the long protracted high volume conflict we're seeing in Ukraine that broke out in the middle or late February of 2022, and then how that's evolved, or that we might see such a thing even against a strategic competitor in the future. So we are just relearning just how resource intensive a long and protracted conflict is, and how the just-in-time model and the model that we went to after the Last Supper has to be changed. We are now in a different era. And so now we're building back a modern industrial base, a modern production. We're doing it internationally and with partners, doing it with new technology, but also the more traditional defense technology. So it's really, that's the inflection point we're talking about. So what I really want to make clear is that we want to do this paradigm shift, do it in a way that's clear-eyed and conscious decisions today, just like they were made in the 90s to change the trend for what we have. This is a conscious thing we need to do. We are doing it. This is not a plea to do it. This is telling you we're doing it. Okay, but it's a plea for all of us to kind of recognize it's a different era, and that's where we are. We have to perform in this different era. And much of this is all about scale and getting a production lines or the equivalent, like with software, there's an equivalent to a production line, up and running, giving partners in the industry a stable North Star, demand signal, whatever you call it, and that they give and ways that they can grow the next generation of workforce. It can adopt modern digital engineering and modern production techniques, collapsing those two together in a modern way. This is all about building that. So, at a broad level, we're making widespread investments to strengthen defense critical supply chain, and these numbers, they're dollars, and I know that that's input, but they're remarkable amounts of dollars. We've roughly included $3.6 billion in this year's budget to bolster foundational sectors in the defense industrial base, such as microelectronics, casting and forgings, batteries, and the rest. Another $1 billion in the IBAS program, which is the program that funds a lot of the regional sustainment and industrial base activities. In addition, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, DoD has invested more than $2.8 billion in supplemental and replenishment funds. Those are the funds that you hear about that the Congress has given us. We've taken also replenishment and USAI funding from that and also put them right into the industrial base, not just buying munitions. And also, these are all ands. Under Title III of the Defense Production Act, we've invested an additional roughly $800 million, again, in underlying key areas like solid rocket motors, forgings, batteries, and the like. It's been an incredible amount of investment. But as we look to the future, we also have to begin thinking about this and how it applies, not just, of course, to the thing in Ukraine, but it applies to the Indo-Pacific. And I know a lot of the Indo-Pacific challenge, as always, falls heavily on the Navy. With the Navy, of course, what starts with a capable fleet that is underpinned by a resilient industrial base. In FY24, the budget request the President has sent includes $33 billion for shipbuilding alone and commits historic resources to the submarine fleet. We are, I don't need to tell this audience, I remember coming to this area and eastern Connecticut in the late 1980s to Groton to do submarine exercises at Deveron 12 and seeing the impact at that time of the post-Cold, as the Cold War was winding down, as our submarine construction was winding down. And we are almost in flip side, exactly the opposite situation today. When you add up the two, what we want to get to with 2 Virginia class a year, the Columbia class Virginia payload module, and yes, on top of it, potentially AUKUS. We are in a totally different situation. And this region, we really need it. Of course, this funding that I talked about includes the Ohio class sustainment of the subs, while continuing construction efforts of the first 2 Columbia class right here in New England. And the ultimate backstop of Secretary Austin's vision of integrated deterrence is the secure and reliable strategic nuclear triad. And reminder, the Columbia is only one of the 3 legs that's being modernized, B-21, as well as Sentinel, which is a replacement for Minuteman III. The Navy also operates in the SSBNs, the most survivable leg of the nuclear triad. It is the crown jewel. Given the anti-access area denial environment posed by China in the Indo-Pacific, submarines will also remain the primary sea platform with access. Due to the great work that goes back 100 years in this area and the difficult physics of the undersea environment and the combination thereof, the United States still remains a superior undersea power in the world. We have to take advantage of that. We have to take advantage of that. The other piece is we have to maintain our overmatch. We cannot be complacent in the undersea domain. So the shipyard optimization program, or infrastructure optimization program, will keep our submarine fleet seaworthy. It includes upgrading existing dry docks, reimagining the physical layout of the shipyards, and replace it antiquated capital equipment with modern machines. We had the tragic incident a few months ago with the loss of that private submersible. And many of us who know the submarine community were looking at that and saying, yeah, that's why SubSafe is so important. You know, SubSafe, that's what this community understands, is how this is a very special and customized skill to build submarines. Successful implementation of the plan will ensure the 4 public shipyards are ready and able to maintain the Navy's current and future submarines, aircraft carriers, destroyers, and frigates. And the budget request also includes $650 million to support multi-year efforts to strengthen the capacity of the submarine industrial base, including support. And you'll hear more about multi-years in just a second. For example, through a regional partnership, we established a next generation partnership for submarine shipbuilding workforce development. In the first 2 years, the program trained more than 3,400 skilled workers and continues diversifying trades through targeted outreach to veterans, women, and younger workers. I think the submarine industrial base work being done here in New England with local and state and federal effort all combined has been a poster child of how we have to work together. And having said all that, we still have more to do. So anyway, hopefully we'll build the next generation of new collar workers, as well as focus on state and regional candidate employer matching activities. And I compliment SENEDIA on the work it has done to support, SENEDIA, support workforce development programs in the region. This is great work. And since 2020, the Alliance has received a cumulative of $54 million in contracts through that IBAS program that I mentioned earlier. And they've done an exceptional job executing those funds to training and develop the industrial workforce across the supply chain in New England. And that's exactly what this IBAS program was intended to do, and a great example of what is possible across the country to continue developing the industrial workforce of the future. We can't sit back and assume we'll always have the cutting edge in countering China and its resources. We will not. We have to assume, we have to be vigilant, and we have to continue to do what America does best, innovate and have the best workforce and the best industrial capacity. As I've said, production matters. It's as simple as that. We need all hands on deck to compete, and we need all of you. Yes, that means our traditional defense partners, but it also means everybody else, including new entrants, of course. This is what I really want you to take away from this, whether it's a small business or emerging tech startup or a university or a public-private partnership or whatever. Every time a new entrant comes into the defense marketplace, it is a win for all of us in national security. It is a win, right? That is what we need to compete. We have to bring every new person in to help us in this fight with all hands on deck. I know it's also not easy or fast navigate doing business with the DoD, but we are working hard every day to change that all the time. And of course, our small business strategy earlier this year is an affirmation that we hear the pain points that are out there. We know about the authority to operate. We know about 800-171 CMMC. We know about contracting takes too long. We know about certified pricing. Not to say we know about it and you have to deal with it. We know we have to make it better for everybody. Those are necessary things that have a function, but we can't make them barriers for entrance. And every time we add one of those for a very sensible reason, we have to look and see what burden it has. And so please keep feeding to us these barriers. We have entire teams that are trying to break those down, and we know that they're serious. Likewise, I hope to provide security assistance to Ukraine in how we're doing it shows we can move fast. Contracts that used to take months to get from initial discussions or RFP to award, we're now doing it in a matter of weeks. We're doing it very, very fast. Contracting can be done fast. Over the last 18 months alone, we've obligated, given on contract, money on contract, more than $18 billion to procure capabilities for the Ukrainians directly from industry or replace equipment drawn from our stocks. So in January of 2022, there was no plan to spend $18 billion in the next year. How are we going to contract to it? What are we going to do with it? We've done it. Now, of course, spending the money and contracting it is just like when your child is born, you say, well, now the hard work's over. No, now the hard work begins. And now really a lot of the work is with you, with industry, and we need to help you execute this important work that the taxpayer has trusted us for Ukraine. We've also already committed just as much in additional contracts that are in various stages of being finalized. There's a lot more going on right now. And from the inside, we're focused on better aligning our enterprise acquisition systems. That is, sorry for the buzzwords and the Washington speak, the requirements process, the acquisition process, and the budgeting process. Those three have to be aligned and agile for us to move fast. When they are, magic happens. That's how the Air Force RCO does it. That's how software is developed. We have to move that more broadly across the department, and we are. And so that's really, really important. It takes hard work. At the end of the day, China is taking a whole of nation approach, and we too as a country, need to take a whole-of-nation approach with our values, not their values, of course. Ours will certainly be different. Again, our values. We don't have to have state-owned enterprise, and we respect things like competition and human rights and intellectual property. But our special sauce is the entrepreneurial spirit and the creativity of Americans and our partners. The innovation it generates and our ability to deliver when it matters. And again, innovation has to include scale. Not everything in the research and science and technology arena should transition to scale. It shouldn't, but some should, and it has to be scale. We have a lot of that special sauce in the room today and for this conference of what makes America great. And I also know that that's why conferences like this are really important. And so from our elected officials, both sides of the aisle, to emerging and traditional industry partners, DoD leaders to academia, there's a wide swath represented here, and everybody has a role to play. And we must focus on actually solving the problem, not just admiring it from our respective foxholes as business as usual. If something doesn't seem to be happening, and we continue to see it go so far and then get stopped, whether it's valley of death or whatever, ask why. Don't just admire it. All of us should say why, and there's usually an underlying cause. This actually may make sense, and not just say, well, that's just life. That happens sometimes. We have to get past that. All of us do, including me and everybody else. And we also have to maintain a relentless search of urgency. This is urgent for the Ukrainians. Today, as we speak, in some of the counteroffensive activity, there are people, Ukrainians, people that are making the ultimate sacrifice, probably in some degree of numbers. And so it kind of wakes you up a little bit when you look at what's actually at stake here. And of course, as I always say, if you think it's been expensive so far, let Russia prevail. Let Putin keep going. That'll get expensive, much more. So this is why this is so important. The department is mobilizing this defense industrial base, as I've said, in a way we haven't seen in decades, since the Last Supper. And the bottom line is we have to all be in, and includes the 400,000 plus New Englanders supporting the warfighter every day, and that's all of you. And thank you, and I'm happy to do a few questions. Hi. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any, when looking at the way you're organized across the R&D community, the acquisition community, the operations community, the accreditation community, and looking at it more of an integrated program, product view, rather than just global things?
Yeah, they are. They are. And I'll just be a caveat that and you all know this, when you attack problems by reorgs and boxes and who's in boxes, whatever, that's one option, but you can also attack it other way, which is what we're doing a little bit of both. Okay, let me describe, yes, something very specific. Competitive Advantage Pathfinders, CAPS. Okay, we started this about a year and a half ago, where it was a hypothesis. Could we, and this is across the Defense Department, across all of those communities that you just mentioned. I mentioned earlier that there's these three legs of the stool called acquisition, programming, which is dollars, and requirements. And at the macro level, that includes all of the things that you're talking about. And I said if they work together in an agile fashion, you can have magic. Well, what we decided to do was we picked about 8 to 10 Pathfinders at the Deputy Secretary of Defense level. So this is with all the services, all the leaders of the services. And our objectives were to pick 8 things. We ended up with 8 things that had the following characteristics. Number one, not adding extra money. Changing color of money, moving around is fine. Number two, relevant in the high-end fight, e.g. the Pacific, for example. 3, that you have a path to get to scale, meaning we want to see something that you pull to the left and get on ships, on airplanes, to the warfighter in 3 years, 2 years, whatever, at these numbers. And we wanted to see what you could do within the limits of the system. And it's been remarkable. We've got examples where we skipped a generation on LRASM, a type of anti-ship weapon, skipped a generation. And that had to do with moving colors of money and being very clever with a whole bunch of things. Second is we're putting in a whole bunch to work around all the authority to operates and running into barriers of classification of why can't these capabilities that were delivered at a higher classification for this service, can we bring them down at a lower level of classification? And can we then export them into an open architecture and plug them in across services? The answer is yes, and we're doing it. It's going to go, and so think of it as terms of a lot of the countering kill chain work, if you want to call it that. Counter C5ISRT is sometimes called. And if you think about the open architectures that we've been putting out in a lot of our systems across the services, well, now, if you take advantage of them, you can start porting across and scaling very rapidly. And when we're going to be announcing, showing some of these things, it's remarkable what you can do. We've done about 8 of these. We've done it now, we're on the second round. And we have a whole list of lessons learned. The main thing I took away from it is a lot of this you can do without new authorities from the Congress. What it takes, though, is it takes leadership to work it across the level. And people who are in the acquisition side will sometimes not understand, because they don't know it, it's not their thing, that the issue isn't you, there's a requirement is not right. And here's an example of a requirement issue. Let's say one service has a really well-validated requirement to deal with, let's say, a Pacific Navy scenario. I'll take that in the last, but let me talk about this. Not that you have any specific interest in next generation fueling. No, let me finish. Think about something the Navy's had to worry about given the Navy situation in INDOPACOM. Well, guess what? The other services have to worry about the same thing now, right? Because it's not just the Navy that has to deal with these challenges. It has to be other forces. The Air Force has to deploy planes, has to put things forward. The Army has to do it too. But do those other services have the requirement for it? Some of them do, some of them don't. It actually turns out, very bureaucratic thing, you can take a validated requirement from one service and go through very quickly and put it right in another. Teaching people how to do that is what we're doing. And then that's when you're seeing this stuff cross apart. Now you're talking about next generation tanker. What's your question? Straight to what, I'm sorry? Yeah. So generally, I mean, not to get too philosophical on you, on issues like that, I do want to open up to the question. On issues like that, so let's take that example. It's got to be survivable. What does survival mean? You got to define what that means against one threat, and then what do you build to in that? And then we have to make the decision of, do we do more risk reduction work, or every year we add another year of risk reduction, we delay getting it to the warfighter? Or is it better just to go right now into EMD? So those are all the things we're doing. Another requirements issue, I want it to be resilient. But what does that mean? You have to really nail these things down, and as we all know, get to a derived requirement to the point that you actually get to a technical spec. That's hard work. That's just an example on the requirement side. On the budgeting side, on the skip generation for LRASM, we have a new idea, a new concept ready to go for LRASM. The LRASM money is procurement money. This needs RDT&E. Well, we can't do it. Wrong color of money. What do? We ask for above threshold reprogramming to Congress? No, the Navy just said, we'll use this other funding line that has RDT&E in it. And it's perfectly fine. And they did it and boom. These are examples of what we're talking about. In acquisition, of course, it's moving fast into contracting, using either an MTA, mid-tier acquisition, an OTA. There's a lot of tools. But working across those 3 legs is what we're talking about. Other questions?
LaPlante, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
My question has to, earlier, and I know you missed that presentation, the China Maritime Institute from the War College was here. They're talking about the importance of Taiwan with chip manufacturing. And then we see the CHIPS Act come out, right? $280 billion, a lot of money. But if you were trying to replicate something that Taiwan has as a national security offset, just kind of wondering what you think about the future of chip manufacturing in the United States.
Well, the future overall of chip manufacturing, of course, and chip manufacturing, as you know, is multiple pieces of that. There's the design piece. There's also the the fabrication, the different tooling, the wafers themselves. So it's a complex set of things that all is part of that. The bottom line is it's been recognized for a long time. The CHIPS Act is a culmination that we as a country outsource or let outsource most of this too much, and the part of the microelectronics in that race. Okay, so the CHIPS Act was a culmination of a series of funding, as you mentioned, but it was also a series of tax breaks and other things to encourage companies to come back into this country and do pieces of that manufacturing here. And we're seeing the effect of it. It's interesting what I've seen with some of the chip manufacturers to build a foundry or build a production facility in any country is tens of billions of dollars. The other point to remind ourselves is we in the DoD are a very, very small part of that economy of microelectronics. So, but the companies are coming here and announcing building fabs and new manufacturing sites because of the tax breaks and other things we're giving them. What we in the DoD have to do is we have to preserve, rightfully so, our equities and make sure that that market drives to us as well, even though we have a small share of it. Our equities, nuclear hardening, trusted, assured processing, if you want to call it zero trust. Yes, even at the single-digit nanometer level. Those are equities that we have, that we need to be preserved. And the good news is there's actually really good thought and work going into this by particularly R&E, that I think we've got a good plan on how we protect our equities in this larger microelectronics environment. But make no mistake, it is the challenge. It's one of the challenges of the 21st century. But I'm actually optimistic. We got a lot of more work to do though. Yes. Other. Yes.
Jeff said that Dick spoke of a bounty here recently.
Yeah.
Could you provide more detail on that?
Some detail, not a lot, because it's still, some of it's still being worked. Or I don't want to get ahead of my boss is probably the best way to say it. Yeah, you may have heard about it. It was announced on Monday, called the Replicator. It's to produce within a short period of time, 1 to 2 years. 2 years, I think, is the number. A large number of these so-called autonomous vehicles, if you want to call it that, that would be ready to go to the warfighter. That's what she announced. And again, the way I think about it is, remember I talked about this scale issue. It's to start to tell people the innovation issue is not just the thing, the widget. It's about the scale that you can do it with. So when you hear CCA talked about by the Air Force, Combat Collaborative Aircraft, CCA, the most important thing when Secretary Kendall talks about it is he says we're going to build 1,000 to 2,000 of them. That is the most important thing of that whole concept. So what you saw in the Deputy's announcement was what we believe is, for all the really good innovation work that's happened over the last 8 years, decade, DIU, all the new acquisition authorities, et cetera, the piece of it that has to close the deal is scale. And so we're kind of throwing the gauntlet down to all of us to say, all right. So now as innovators have to think about production. We have to think about production. Production is part of your innovation. That's what that's about. And I think it's a challenge for all of us. My takeaway is what I said earlier. It's because production matters so much. It's almost like if you were doing high rates of production, that's your industrial-based strategy in many ways. If you think about it, it wraps up lots of things. It wraps up workforce, supply chain, everything else. Now, we tamped down production after the Last Supper. So we shouldn't be surprised that we're relearning again that this production thing is kind of important. Other questions? No? Well, I try to give shorter answers so I get more questions. So now I can't be accused of talking too long. Well, I can be, but... Well, anyway, I appreciate being here, and thank you. I know the last speakers have been a long few days. Hopefully you got something out of this. I just encourage you all to think about the numbers and the scale issue and what you do. I know in the commercial world, I understand investors think about the potential marketplace for whatever the technology is that they're investing in or the widget. Think about your marketplace for national security is the warfighter. Yes, it would be really nice if it was valid for the warfighter and there's a commercial application and you get win-win. Okay. Doesn't happen very often. So when you're thinking about it, don't just think about this is a cool widget. It's so cool. I fell in love with it, and the Navy needs to fall in love with it just as much as me. And, you know, no, think about it as what is the Navy's the market. Why is that compelling for that market to use that? Not just because it's cool, but use it because it's cost effective and it matters in the fight, and you can reproduce it and you can train to it. Then the marketplace wants it. I ask you all to think about that. So anyway, thanks again. Hopefully, if I'm the last talk, have a good happy hour. I guess it's going to be all afternoon. Is that right? No? Okay, thank you.
So, Dr. LaPlante, thank you again for your time today. Thank you for leading us as a team. Thanks for what you do for our nation, our war fighters, and certainly thank you for supporting SENEDIA. It's really a special group, and we really appreciate your time. I have a famous SENEDIA coin for you, sir.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Tim? Now I'll begrudgingly invite Tim and congratulate him again for another conference. Thanks,
Thank
Tim.
you. Thank you, Dr. LaPlante. All right, that's a wrap. And Dr. LaPlante, the strategy is bringing a heavy hitter as your closer. So thank you for that. I'd just like to take a minute and thank the SENEDIA staff who have worked for months effortlessly looking in the room, but a lot of work going into all of this. Tim, Rachel, Nate, Tammy, Shay, Matt, and the unflappable Molly McGee. Thank you, everybody. That also, the Marriott, Bruce, Ray, the whole Marriott team, thank you for everything you did to make this happen. The website goes live first week in January-ish for next year. We're already booked here, same place, same time, same channel. So the week before Labor Day, as you know, the 30 booths sell out in about a day and a half, and the 300 seats sell out in about a week. So look in January for the site to go live, and then February, March, April, Molly gets the "I'm so important, you need to let me in" call. So those will all come too. So try to get in there for early and get in there for next year, and we look forward to seeing you. Thank you all very much.